SYS presents Adventures in Online Education.
Hello, friends. You're listening to SYS Presents Adventures in Online Education. I'm your host, Natalie Conway. Thanks for being here. On today's episode, I have the pleasure of speaking with Jonathan Redeker. Jonathan brands himself as an educational disruptor in his role as an educational technology specialist. He says he's not working toward best practices, but rather next practices. He believes that innovation and creativity are where we are supposed to live as educators, and that the phrase that will kill a career is, "But I've always done it this way." Today, Jonathan and I discuss project-based learning, differentiation, and how we can connect authentically with our students. This is a really cool conversation. So are you ready? Let's learn something new. Jonathan Redeker, welcome to the podcast. I'm really honored to have you here today.
Thanks. It's great to be here. I really appreciate the invitation, and I look forward to chatting.
Awesome. We're going to dive into some project-based learning and all things ed tech today. But before we get into that, I have a confession. I've been told I'm a millennial. I'm not really sure how I feel about that. Being born in 1983 makes me on the older end of that spectrum. I think that for me, technology isn't scary, but as a mom, I do consider things like screen time. And I can remember printing out directions on MapQuest or using dial-up, all the things, old tech, right? We had a typewriter when I was a kid, and then a Brother word processor, which we thought was the bee's knees, until I went to college, and then I had a desktop. And now we have computers in our back pockets. So I've seen technology change my life in real time. There is a generation now referred to as iGen, yes? And can you tell us who they are and what adaptations to online instruction and online education do we need to make in order to meet the needs of iGen?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, we're from the same generation, which is great to connect with somebody who has had those experiences of remembering when dial-up internet came into our homes and what that wait time was like. Now we're
brutal
waiting for things to download and, to our devices so we can leave the house without Wi-Fi or whatever. And it's sometimes we're so impatient. But, the worst thing ever was when someone picked up the phone and you lost your connection, right? So
that was the worst.
But I think you identified as a millennial. Some researchers would say if you're born in 1983, you might be on the tail end side of that and called a geriatric millennial, which I have taken moniker as well. I kind of like, my children think that that's great that I'm a geriatric millennial. So I like that one. And it's a funny story too. Just this week, I have an 8-year-old and 11-year-old, and I was taking them to the bus and they were climbing around in my car. And in the glove box, I have an old iPod. Not the shuffle, but one of the first generation iPods with the click wheel and whatever else. And it just runs music in the car sometimes. They don't know what it is, but they discovered it. And they started playing with it, and they didn't know how to operate it or what it was. It was amazing. And they thought that was the most archaic technology that they could ever see.
Oh, that's really fun.
But I know it's interesting, and I'm a big fan of the book called iGen. You mentioned them by Jean M. Twenge. I don't know if I'm saying her name correctly, Twenge, but that's a great book. And it actually, one of the fascinating things about that is it's very research-based, but it talks about even some of the challenges that our generation faced as millennials. Some of the things that we looked at and tried to win at are actually, we have won, but it actually could have caused some different problems. So whereas we have created in some ways more safety or more the illusion of safety in certain things, there are more dangerous things that have come out on the other side of that as well, including the idea that we parents today don't just like drop their kids off at the mall and go hang out, right? They drop them off and hang out at the food court so that they're nearby, or that they track them on a smartphone app, so that they can find where they are and what's going on. And there's so many good things about that, right, about safety and security, but what does that do to our rebellious spirit? What does that do to our interaction with others? it's tricky to know where that projects. But students these days, and I feel like a really geriatric person when I say things like kids these days. But I actually used to be a government teacher in New York State. We have a mandatory class for seniors called Participation in Government. And when you talk to students, whether it's in that type of class or in an English class, about even something like freedom and security, most young people today have no concern about living in a digital surveillance state. And if you recall, for other people in our generation and beyond especially, it was quite scandalous when the government, especially the United States government, especially after like 9/11, for the sake of national security, the Patriot Act was passed, and people were kind of like freaking out, like the government can listen to my phone calls. And if you ask high schoolers, middle schoolers today, hey, do you care that your text messages, your Snapchats, like whatever communications could be recorded and archived? Most of them don't have much of a concern about that. And they'll just shrug their shoulders and say, I've got nothing to hide. But that's a tricky wicket to go through. And I think that it gives me a lot of pause when you talk about the generation and what their values are. And I think that can be quite challenging in a digital age. And in schools, we're focusing on it too, where we're talking about new data privacy laws in most states around the country, where we're trying to protect student data for them, but yet they don't seem to care about their own data. And that is going to provide some interesting challenges in the years to come, and how they come out of that and enter the world without schools looking after them, as I guess the Latin word is in loco parentis, right? When we're in schools, we're functioning as parents, but and even once they grow out of school and grow out of their homes and move on, what does that look like for them, and what are they willing to accept are some major challenges.
Absolutely. And it's interesting that you bring up that as much as parents or educators might be concerned about digital privacy and security of information, that the students themselves appear or express that they are not. And so what can we do to educate them about what is important to keep private, in terms of young kids online? Okay, what kind of information do you share or not share, for example? And then for older kids, understanding the consequences, which I know developmentally and neurologically is really hard for high schoolers as well as middle schoolers to understand, that pictures or videos or whatever they're posting online that's there forever can have consequences down the road. Or if maybe they really believe that they don't, and that we're living in a new age. And so when you and I were going for job interviews and folks were looking at our Facebook pages, maybe folks aren't as phased now, or I'm not sure. But it's a really interesting consideration when working with this generation and subsequent generations, especially in an online setting, that the culture of online teaching and online learning shifts pretty constantly, but then our societal expectations too. It's interesting about the government class too. I wonder if online schools could maybe consider a course that would focus on the laws across the country that are changing or being developed. I know there was a state that sued a social media company and won. And everyone who is a member in that state, I'll have to look it up, put in the show notes maybe, is getting a payout from a settlement about digital privacy. So it's absolutely a concern.
It's interesting in tandem, right, as we're talking about more digital instruction. A couple of things are happening across the nation. I think if you look, and I'm, just for your listeners and everything too, I'm based in New York State, but I'm aware of a lot of other trends and things happening across the nation. One of the interesting ones that for all of, maybe the jokes you might make, and no offense to the listeners, about like what goes on in the state of Florida. I don't know if you ever look up hashtag Florida Man on like in social media or anything. But in the state of Florida, the governor has, and whatever the education board is there, has implemented new civic readiness expectations that they have to take. It's mandatory that you have to take classes in public school to be more aware of some of these things. New York State as well, that's been part of it, but they've even changed and added a new civic readiness graduation pathway that you can take. We'll do some more project-based learning in that as well, which is kind of neat, and it was sort of right up my alley. And at the same time, they're implementing computer science standards across the country too. So a lot of people are surprised, when my background is in social studies education, and now I'm the technology coordinator for a school district. And a lot of people are sometimes surprised about that jump, right? They might think a math science person goes into technology or whatever, but for me, it's these conversations about, privacy and morals and ethics, and so many of those things dovetail together. And I think that that's really positive, because as things change and we innovate and we adopt new things, all of our laws in our society are reactive. Nothing's proactive. So we don't know yet what the laws are going to be around self-driving cars, for instance, and that's one of the things that's holding that industry back, because we just can't anticipate the problems yet. And so but now they're very cautious. But there were no seatbelt laws when we built cars at the turn of the century. It was when danger happened and accidents occurred that we started to implement some of those laws. And so there will be some reactions that take place, but most of the policies that guide our internet use, including our privacy rights and who has access to what, are pretty archaic, or in terms of the age of technology anyway, in terms of how long ago they were written. And you look at things now, like our privacy laws, that are written with good intent, but also handcuff things. So in New York State, we have this policy that we refer to as Education Law Part 2D, or 2D Part 121, which is the student privacy policy that all of our software and applications have to be vetted for, and for privacy rights, that we're going to protect student data in two ways: that we will as a school district, and that the companies will. But a lot of companies, if you're a developer and you don't have a legal team to go sort through all these documents that every district in the state is sending you, where's the sense of entrepreneurial spirit and those people that can really change the game in quick ways? Those pivot moments that we've seen with technology, maybe slowed down by the idea of these policy changes. And so we start to see some issues with that on a policy side. But in reality here, the conversations that we have about privacy and access for young kids, especially this iGen, as you led off with in this first question, there's some really basic conversations you can have. An elementary school student has conversations with their teachers in kindergarten, first grade, 5, 6, 7-year-old kids, about the difference between private spaces and public spaces, physical spaces. What is the bathroom for us, right? Where we use the bathroom is a private space and always should be a private space, and what's the difference on a public space? Oh, well, like the auditorium and the gymnasium, right? People can see us and they know what we're doing, and that's okay. And those conversations can dovetail without even the use of technology, just as conversations that can give the understanding of things that can fly later into those worlds. And for the high school students, or middle school too, even if it's so scary today to think about, and I don't want to make any listeners alarmed, but just as far as how we live our lives, I tell students all the time, if you're at a party, even with your family, and somebody says to you, hey, would you hold my beer? I got to go to the bathroom, and you're holding their beer at a party and someone takes a picture, suddenly you're implicated with underage drinking, and there's this, because of social media and, the public space that we live in. So that's a really interesting challenge that we didn't face growing up, and any pictures that did surface might have been buried out the 1 hour photo, or once you printed the one. my children don't understand that my sister worked at a 1 hour photo shop developing pictures back in the day, right next to the Blockbuster.
So did I for a summer.
Yeah. So it was a 1 hour photo on the Blockbuster video, things our children will never understand. But
right.
It's interesting.
There is still a Blockbuster video here in Oregon.
Oh, wow.
The final
one. I saw that documentary too. But I think it's interesting in that there is no difference in public and private life in so many ways for young people. And a great anecdote is that when we were kids, you would see maybe a couple friends over the weekend or something like that. But on Monday morning at school, you would connect with everybody and you would talk about your weekend. So what you did and what movie you saw. And, you went to this great restaurant or whatever you did over the weekend, or over your summer vacation, or whatever it is, whatever break you had from those in-person friends. And nowadays, it's almost like, well, you don't have to have those conversations because you've seen it all already on their Insta story or their Snap story or whatever. And it's interesting to think about those parents and families, and I'm not that age yet for my children to have their own mobile devices. I'm on the fence about when I do that. But if kids aren't following other kids on social media, it's almost like, how are we even friends? You don't know about me unless you follow my social media presence. And we don't have to have conversations because you've seen that already, right? And I guess in a way it can foster positive conversations. You can say, oh, tell me more about that thing you did this weekend. And they could just jump right into a quick, conversation. But it's a little bit weird. And so our private lives, the things that we did with our family and friends, whatever, is now totally public in so many ways. And for better or worse, I'm not sure how to weigh in on that completely, but that's a great illustration of the difference between public and private for older people.
Absolutely. And this really, listening to you gets my mind going about all the different projects we could pose to students to engage in discussions on all of these concerns or ideas, from public to private spaces to digital safety, digital citizenship, consequences for posting, whatever it might be, or new rules for new technology. So it would be incredible to have some high school students developing potential rules or laws around self-driving cars, for instance, or retina technology and all of that. So there are definitely opportunities for us as educators to stretch ourselves and also our students' scope and engage in some of these conversations, because critical thinking is one of those 21st century skills that we all value very highly right now, and employers, no matter what realm, are valuing as well. So it really opens the door. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to dive a little bit more specifically into project-based learning. Stay tuned. What's the one thing all online schools and programs struggle with? Student engagement and the ability to truly personalize interventions. How do we solve those problems? With the use of Admin Dash, a brand new Canvas LTI tool from SYS Education. Admin Dash allows online teachers to see a risk assessment score that proactively identifies students who may need more specialized attention or intervention, and offers a communication log that provides an outlet for complete transparency among teachers, admin, students, and families. At just 99 cents per student per year, and with no minimum price and no fees, you can't afford to not use Admin Dash. For more information about Admin Dash, contact sales at syseducation.org and start connecting proactively with your online learners. Welcome back, folks. We are talking with Jonathan Rediker today, and we're going to dive into a little bit more about project-based learning, which we touched on in the first part of the show. Project-based learning and place-based learning have become more common terms in education. That's not to say that we are all working with the same definitions of those terms, though. That said, schools pride themselves on utilizing these approaches. In the online setting, place-based education can be tricky because students are physically located over a large geographic area. It seems to me, at least, that PBL, or project-based learning, is much more doable online. Jonathan, what do you think? Can online teachers engage students with authentic project-based learning? And what could that look like?
Well, it's a little bit of a loaded answer right away, so it's a nice, quick hitter. First off, what do you think? Nice setup for me here, but trying to unpack that in a couple of different ways. And first of all, I want to give just an acknowledgement that online learning is a major pivot for a lot of people. And this past couple of years have been incredibly difficult, but there have been incredible lessons that we've learned from that. And then those that continue to do that, or in a hybrid setting, or can leverage that for the sake of extending learning and learning opportunities, that's awesome. And I have the utmost respect for everybody working to do that. And of course, we want that interpersonal connection, which I think has a valuable place, but that can also be achieved through online connections as well. But I want to mention here just at the outset that my teaching experience predominantly has been in the secondary level. But I think that the idea of project-based learning has really been done well with elementary teachers from the beginning of time. I mean, I don't know. As I've started, I don't know how long we can go back to the idea of differentiation and customized learning and meeting children with different project goals and different learning goals. We talk a lot about students with special needs, who need different learning goals and different targets and things like that. But at the elementary level, at least in not my district where I've worked most of my career, I have seen elementary school teachers model just phenomenal differentiation of classroom assignments, where you have kids sitting in pods and on carpets and on Chromebooks or computers, or working in reading groups at different levels. And I think that is really some of the best model teaching. And if we can look at what an elementary school teacher does on a day-to-day basis, that's a lot of where project-based learning sort of needs to get to, in my opinion, because project-based learning too often has been the teacher assigns a project to kids, right? Complete the
Right.
slideshow or complete the speech or whatever the project was. But the idea of open-endedness, where there's some different goals and targets, is something that's very difficult, I think, for secondary teachers to think about. And elementary school teachers could really be elevated in this world to try to sort of model some of their pedagogy. I also think, as a quick aside, I think they deserve hazard pay for all the wiping of noses and tying of shoes and things like that. When I became a parent, I was keenly aware of how I could not function that well as an elementary school teacher. So,
And I think you made a good distinction between completing a project and engaging in project-based learning, because completing a project, though valuable in and of itself and can be a great learning experience, isn't quite the same. Project-based learning is more open-ended, in my understanding at least. Like, here's a problem, or here's a concern, or here's a thing we need to solve or figure out. And you're right that at elementary, we're really trained, because that's my primary realm, is elementary and special education. We are trained to see the 5 different routes a kid could go to get to the end goal, or the 3 different end goals it could end up with. That would be acceptable demonstration of a skill to us. So project-based learning really does give you that flexibility and ability to differentiate without you, the teacher, necessarily having to make 5 different lesson plans even. You're just creating kind of pathways. What kind of digital tools do you think teachers could be using for this, or maybe scenarios even? Do you have ideas to kickstart anybody who might want to try it?
sure. And I think the first caveat to all of that is that there is no prescriptive model to it or tool that's going to give you the entire PBL pathway. But the biggest question, and I know project-based learning is the easiest way to describe it, but you hit on a key word there, is that it's about problems. And I like the idea of problem-based learning more than anything else, to give kids a problem or to ask kids what the problems are that need to be solved and then help them find a path to do that. And just like anything, any other assignment you're going to start from and try to get from point A to point B, there's some really important scaffolding that needs to take place in any type of planning like this. And you might have a vision or idea of what kind of problem or thing you might need to solve in your classroom. I had a great, sort of even the idea of a math problem recently. I'm going to try to quickly mention this, but I struggle sometimes in math because I am a civics background. I mentioned, social studies before. But I struggle sometimes in thinking about the math area, but I actually really think that there's some great value. And my friend recently was posing on his social media page. Here's his question. He said, Scott has to fill his mower with gas to mow the lawn. The gas station number 1 is 0.9 miles away and has gas on sale for $5.55 a gallon. Gas station number 2 is 3.3 miles away and has gas for $4.79 a gallon. The vehicle carrying the gas gets an average of 21 miles per gallon. But to get to the gas station number 2 will require local roads through a hilly part of town. The vehicle registers at half full for a 20-gallon tank. And he's asking, at what point do I buy an electric mower? Right? He's like, that's actually the problem. Is not what the math is about this, but like, when does it actually make sense to convert things? Right? So even in a science math world, we're talking about, like, right now, right, with renewable energy and those kind of questions that are out there, like, at what's the threshold where it actually makes sense to do some of these things per household or per person, right? So one of my administrators drives a diesel car, and diesel's more than unleaded right now in terms of prices. On May 26, 2022, I don't know if we're recording that, but and the data that we're recording this, we are the diesel prices are higher, and he's like, I got to get an electric vehicle. And I'm like, well, that's still going to drive, coal prices. It's going to be based on coal that fires power plants or, whatever that might be. Like, are you charging this on solar? Like, at what point you're putting now solar on your house? And there's interesting questions and problems that can be applied to really any content area. But we want to start by asking authentic questions, and those authentic questions can be driven from any type of conversation. So the first really question I think to ask is, how are we connecting with students? I know we're talking about digital tools in an online way, but if we're just providing that in a whole class instructional piece, we might be failing in that regard. And so if we're going to talk about digital instruction, and we have maybe our students are virtual or a hybrid type environment, how are we actually helping the students collect an inventory of the things that they're concerned with or they're passionate about or they're focused on? And how do we actually elevate that? So does that mean we're doing one-on-one conversations? We're setting up private Zoom calls or meeting with students as they can, having phone calls, having email exchanges with them, but using our digital tools as a way to connect with the students to find out where their heads and hearts are is really significant. And so whether or not we want to talk about what type of graphic organizers and activities to do, we really have to understand who our students are and where they're at. And that being said, once you do that, there's a lot of simple tools like scaffolded questions. We might need to help them fill out charts. When I was a government teacher, I had a project called Civic Action Projects. And I just framed it out to them and I said, regular people can make change. Like, you don't have to wait for your government to do it. Regular people can step up and make change too. And maybe that's lobbying the government because that is their job. But if you want to make change, let's do it and let's figure that out. And so, when you talk to students about what they care about, now my students have been in school for probably 13 years. They're, seniors in high school. And I said, well, what do you guys care about? And they stare at you blankly, or don't respond in the text or whatever it is. And you have to start to have those conversations personally, and they still might not get there. So you have to give them some scaffolded questions. And it's okay in a project-based learning or problem-based learning with it. It's supposed to be exciting and innovative to start with a very basic chart. Number 1, what are 5 things I'm good at? Number 2, what are 5 things I'm interested in, right? Or what are 5 problems in our society or in the science math world or whatever topic you're focusing on. Like, identify basically those basic worksheet activities sometimes just to get to the point of that foundational building block, and so they can address those needs. We really have to focus on the who, what, where, when, why, how. And the how might be the exciting part, right? If we're going to go do something crazy and different. But the issues we have to address first, and to sort of take an inventory of yourself and of the topic that you're trying to focus on.
It's really incredible to me how often, no matter what topic I'm speaking to a guest about, that they say it comes down to connecting with students. And that first and foremost, before you do the thing, whether, today we're talking about project-based learning, or if we're talking about universal design for learning, or whatever it might be that I speak with any educator about, they always end up somehow in the conversation, we go, oh, but you need to know the kids first. And it's really true. We sometimes take that for granted. And I know in a high school setting, especially, that can be challenging because you see a lot of students. And in your 3rd grade classroom are usually pretty self-contained. You've got your hopefully 30 or less students in front of you who you're getting to know the whole year. And in middle school and high school, those numbers grow exponentially. So I know that it is challenging and I acknowledge that. But I love that you've given us permission to start really small and start really simply. And start with a scaffold for us as the educators to say, okay, yeah, I'm going to hand out this worksheet and they can fill this out, or I'm going to put this Google form up and get some data and some information that way. Because to solve authentic problems, like you said, you have to have somewhat of an authentic relationship with your students first so that they feel, one, okay taking those risks and engaging in this open-endedness. I've talked on the podcast before about how if any of my high school teachers had done some kind of open-ended PBL thing, I probably would have freaked out because I just wanted to know exactly what we were doing and do it right.
I think that's helpful at the beginning, right? That's why I mentioned scaffolding. You do need to level that out step by step and maybe have some sort of rubric for the expectation at the end so that they know what that looks like. But you can do that over time. It doesn't need to be all handed out at once because that's also very, very overwhelming. So, as far as logistics are concerned, because you asked about tech tools, I'm a Google user in terms of my work. You could use Microsoft, whatever other platform you want. You could use something off-brand. I mean, you could use there's tons of websites out there that go do this, but just as sort of laying it out sort of in a portfolio or like a digital binder type way, because then you can sort of unlock different pages or add different pages of expectations and their work, right? So one of the things that's important is most PBL is going to take place over time. And we need to give time for that. We need to accept time for that. And I think that's one of the best avenues of the internet-based classroom or the digital world where you can have that time. And, if you're going to do a study on some topic or need to talk to somebody in a different time zone, well, that's great because we're not then focused on the 9 to 5 or the whatever 8 to 3 school day that we have. We're focused on the time, and we can do that, and we can learn, and we can connect any time and place. So those are really kind of neat features of doing it, taking an online approach to it, and including the experts. One of the things that I think is really significant is to bring experts in the world. into the PBL experience, and I used to do it 2 times. So when I was doing a lot of PBL before my current role changed, one of the things that I would do is I would have students present their ideas to an authentic audience of people who were involved in the community or in that world. I would try to mix it up based on what the students had sort of brainstormed for their topics, and I would try to bring in representatives from different worlds. So, one time we had somebody from our state senator's office come in. I've had local politicians, people from their Parks and Rec community, from the food pantry, from just like volunteers in society to come in and talk to the students. And what that did for them, even just teachers, other people, right? What it did for them was it opened an opportunity to present their ideas in front of an adult, real audience that can give them feedback, and they would offer advice. They would ask critical questions, and then I would try to bring those same people in at the termination of the assignment, at the finale, to then have people present what they did, whether they succeeded or failed, and then also to circle back and ask some critical questions of them too. So those people were instrumental. And the digital world of hopping on, it's so much easier to hop on a Zoom call or a Google Meet or whatever it is for anybody in their place of work or what have you than to come into a school building and carve out a day to come and do that. So that piece of the authentic audience with digital online learning can just be incredible. You can take an expert from an issue around the world. I mean, I had students once concerned about Tibetan freedom. I'm not bringing in like a Tibetan national from where I live into my government class, but can we find somebody either somewhere across this country or in Tibet to come and speak to us? Like, that may be available to us through networking online. And so those things really changed, and that's really one of the great powers of the internet in education, is leveling that playing field and breaking down the walls of our communities. Because in a world where we see a lot of strife and turmoil and fear and all those kind of things, if we can use the internet to open up windows to other communities, we'll be much more tolerant, diverse people with better perspectives on life. That's really an incredible, powerful tool. And so that's really significant, is to get that authentic audience in there. I think 2 times at least, maybe even more, if people are willing to collaborate in your groups, maybe to coach people or to work with them in their groups. But it's going to go nowhere, and this is real feedback that I've had from students that I've worked with too, but student project-based learning will go nowhere without an empathy anchor. They need to be able to have something that they care about, something that makes a topic real for them. And all of us, whether we're adults or young people, are focused on this. The big important question is not just why does this matter, but why does this matter to me, right? We're all a little bit self-centered, and especially our students who, when they come to school, they're wondering, what am I going to eat for lunch? Is she going to be at the lunch table? Am I going to have homework? Does this teacher hate me? Like these kind of questions, right? In regular schooling. And those are legitimate things for young people. So to find a way to encourage their hearts to find a reason that they want to do it, or a reason why their work is significant, it matters. And in your traditional schools, you see this all the time. Most of us went to traditional school. Most of us didn't do online school, but you knew that if the teacher told you that your work was going to be put on display for parent night or the art show or whatever it was that was happening, you put a lot more work into it than your day-to-day homework, right? And so to have that experience and to know that that's coming is also a little bit of a pressure point that I think helps us perform better. And so when our students are thinking about that, when we're looking at designing activities that matter, it needs to be something that extends beyond our walls too. And it can be something that applies to your walls, right? It can be the classroom experience or the curriculum that they're dealing with. They're not happy with something, right? I had students in the district that I work in recently appeal to the superintendent because they thought that the district should be doing more about the drug and alcohol problem in our school system, right? And that was a problem that they identified. That wasn't a project we assigned. That was something that they identified that they needed more support because they're watching their friends struggle. And so they reached out directly. Well, that can be part of a PBL. Why not a school improvement project or something like that? And then your experts aren't even that challenging. You find other teachers, you find other colleagues, you loop them in on their lunch period, you offer to buy them lunch the next week or whatever it is, if you can do something like that. Or your online colleagues, right? You find your network, you go on Twitter, you find your learning network and find people who might be able to collaborate and connect with you and make that work. And most people are going to be willing to do that because we're all in this game to help students and to help young people grow. And so if I'm going to help your students, that's great. If I can help my students, that's great too. But we're all helping students. And I think that that's worth it.
Absolutely. I really like the idea of the empathy anchor that speaks directly to, I think, the heart of what we want in education. We want students to be learning about things that they care about and to care about the impact on others, to see the world as bigger than just their small sphere of it. And so to have empathy or sympathy, at least, for others as well, and to realize that, okay, this might not affect me as directly, but it certainly does affect my best friend who is struggling right now. So that does matter to me, those sorts of things. All of that is really important. And as much as we want students to collaborate with one another to solve these problems, and we want to collaborate with our peers or the experts in the field, it also really, especially at the secondary level, lends itself to cross-curricular collaboration. So whatever you're doing in government might apply to science as well, or in math, and be connected.
Right. Everything's going to connect back to your English. You're going to have written response. You're going to want people to research to find out what other solutions have existed and those kind of things as well. So there's a lot of stuff that goes down there. And I would even suggest in your math, right? Are you going to collect data on your issue, right?
And how do you analyze that data? Yeah. What does it look like? What does it really mean?
Right. Is your data valid, right? These are important questions. I saw a funny, I guess it was a meme earlier this week that, like 100% of people who responded to my survey said they like responding to surveys, is what it said. But it's because those are the people that respond to surveys. So that was kind of a funny tongue-in-cheek thing. I do have to give some credit, though, the empathy anchor idea, and someone that I worked with a lot and that I really have a great admiration for, who helped coach our district on some of the PBL initiatives. She's a CEO of an organization called Whymaker, WHYMAKER. And her name is Liz Gallo, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention her with some of the thoughts and ideas that I have, because she's phenomenal, really a STEAM educator. That's her big business, but she helped us do some coaching in PBL in our district and helped to form some of these ideas. So I have to give a big shout out to my friend Liz.
Awesome. I like that. Educators uplifting other educators, always a good thing here. Jonathan, I have one final question for you, if you're up for it.
Final. That's tough. That's a tough word because I'm on a tail here. So go ahead.
I want to ask all guests this season, if there was one thing, material or otherwise, that you could give to every teacher in the United States, what would it be and why?
In my current role, I budget for technology, software, and hardware, and I think about what people need and whether that's tech or training or tools or whatever, but it's really none of that. It's time, and it's time. That's all teachers need. They need time with their students. They need time with their lessons. They need time with their colleagues. They need time to rest. They need time to not have to check email on the weekend. And this is the kind of thing that is the most difficult thing to give them. So where we can do that well would be in finding opportunities to give people breaks, to give people rest, to give people even like workflow management. I do a lot in technology, and again, your whole show is based on internet-based stuff, right? If we're changing our workflow, to computers were supposed to save us time. Remember when that was a thing? Mm-hmm. They were supposed to save us time. But we spend so much time in front of screens now that it seems like the opposite. But if we can save time, if we can manage processes to be better for teachers, for the convenience factor, and they can spend more time with students and colleagues dealing with emotional needs or planning great lessons, then that's the greatest gift we can give them. So I think it's the hardest one to give them. You can't budget for time that easily in your overall organizational budget line. But I think that that's a valuable concept to keep in mind, sort of not, you said not material. And that's my answer. It's just time.
I think that's a beautiful answer, and one that all teachers would appreciate receiving at any point. So thank you for that. Thank you so much for this great conversation. You've given us so much to think about and to start being creative about. If listeners want to get in touch with you or connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
I love my professional learning network on Twitter. So I'm at John Redeker, JONREDEKER. I'm sure we'll put that in the show notes. I'll share my email with you guys as well. And I have a Google site that's listed. Hopefully you can list there as well. It's got some of my interests, some of my ideas, some networking opportunities, some things that I talk about other than these topics too. But definitely connect on Twitter, and I'd love to connect with more listeners and engage with more colleagues around the country and the world.
Absolutely. We have a great network. Thanks so much for your time today, and I look forward to continuing talking with you in social media.
Yeah, thanks, Natalie. It's been a great day.
Have a good one. Thanks for listening to this episode of SYS Presents Adventures in Online Education. Special thanks to my guest today, Jonathan Redeker. Jonathan taught us that open-ended, essential questions can drive excellent instruction and learning, and that using authentic questions is how students connect with our curriculum. If you liked what you heard today, please hit subscribe and give us a 5-star rating. Want to connect? On Twitter, you can follow the show at SYS Presents. We love hearing from you. If you're interested in finding out more about SYS Education and our products and services, head to syseducation.org. Lastly, this podcast wouldn't be possible without our exceptional team at SYS Education, including my dream team, consisting of sound engineer Natalie Farrell, graphic designer and social media and website manager Lexi Boren, and our producer, Bo Neal. Thanks for listening today, and remember, we can learn new things.